Welcome back to the It Girls Guide. Today we are going to do another solo episode, and I'm going to talk about parental relationships. This is something that I didn't think would be a topic of conversation, but as you guys know, I went through a breakup recently, and I had been having some conversations with friends where I was mentioning to them that I had talked to my mom about it, or I talked to my dad about things, and mentioning kind of like the details I had gone into with my parents and the advice I was getting from them. And, I know that I have a close relationship with them, but it really stuck out to me that I had so many friends' reactions be that like, wow, I can't believe you're talking to your parents about that. And I've had, friends who have other kinds of relationship with their parents, maybe they're not as close, not because of anything that happened, but, we're in our 30s, life takes over and your parents live in a different area and things like that. It becomes a little bit more difficult to maintain a certain kind of relationship or a certain kind of closeness with your parents. And it's something that I really take pride in. And I figured it was just a topic of conversation that was worth having because it's not something that came easily. And I don't want, I also don't want to discredit anyone with really difficult, traumatic relationships with their parents and whatnot. I totally understand that that's, something that happens and not everybody needs to have a close relationship with their parents. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of have just a chat about how I got to this place with both of them because it wasn't necessarily easy. And maybe that might help some of you who are struggling in relationship with your parents or, the same things can be applied to other relationships outside of your parents, with your friendships or with work colleagues or really anything. I guess I'll start here and then kind of backtrack, right? So as it stands today, I talk to my mom almost every day. I think part of it is a little bit of her mom anxiety. I share my location with her. She's to know where I am at all times. And I call her to gossip all the time, if I'm stressed out or just, I'm running errands and I want to chat with somebody, right? And then she's gotten really close to some of my girlfriends now as well, which maybe would make some people uncomfortable. For me, it just feels really nice to be kind of at this place with my mom where she is my mom, but she's also my friend at this point because she's kind of stopped parenting me, right? Now it's less of a mother-daughter. There's still a hierarchy, right? Because she's older, wiser, whatnot. She's my mom, but there's a certain level that I don't rely on her as much. And I'm not worried about being grounded, right? I'm not worried about getting in trouble so I can say what it is that I need to say. And she's done the work of parenting me now. So she can just give her opinion and knows that I'm going to walk away and do whatever it is I want. And, with my dad, I don't talk to him every single day. We have a little bit different relationship, but when I do talk to him, it's like we get really deep, straight to the point. And when I say he lectures, that sounds like a bad thing, but I really, really admire his lectures. He's a man of few words, so when he talks, I listen. And I can't think of any big life decision that I've made without at bare minimum venting to my mom first and then talking to my dad. And I really admire both of their opinions, but it didn't start out that way. So if I kind of go back to childhood, right? Start with my relationship with my dad first, because also there's of course an element here of like the dynamic between mother-daughter and then father-daughter is a little bit different. I always say my dad walks on water and I have, reverse daddy issues. He's been so good to me my whole life that, any man that walks into my life has very big shoes to fill. But we didn't talk every day all the time. I wasn't always going to my dad for things, right? But I always did respect him because I felt like he was always very fair, had very few rules growing up. And, we knew, my brother and I knew if my dad said no, he meant no. But he wouldn't say no all the time. He gave us a lot of leeway to make mistakes, correct things, and have these conversations. But, we had autonomy to some degree. But when he said no, you knew it was a hard no and you wouldn't push back. My mom, on the other hand, we'll see. We were a little more were a little more, how would I put it? We did respect her, but she would say no to everything all the time. We didn't always take it seriously. But with my dad, I'll say, we weren't as close growing up. He was very close with my brother because my brother was playing sports, right? And they had that connection. I started playing sports because I wanted more attention from him, right? And then I started to realize that the dynamic between my dad and I worked really well when he was giving me advice or talking me through something. And I recognized that was the way that we could kind of bond. So maybe I'm not going to games and like going on long walks to chat with my dad, but I knew if I needed clear advice or I needed something from him, I could always go to him and he would never judge me and whatnot. And then when I talk about how that reflects on relationships with, men in my life now, I'll say one of the best things my dad did was he was so good to my mom, at least in front of my face, right? I'm sure in any relationship there's ups and downs, but both of them were very good about, keeping their relationship out of their parenting, I guess you would say, because my parents they were divorced and they got remarried to each other. And it's kind of a funny story I tell. I don't know if I've told on the podcast before, but they got divorced and remarried. And I guess technically I didn't find out until I was like 12 or 13. I was looking for my birth certificate and found their marriage license. And I ran into my parents' room. I was like, you only got married a couple years ago. And they were like, we were divorced. And then you start to think, I remembered all the times where, when my parents were divorced, we lived in Lafayette, Louisiana, this small town in Louisiana. My dad lived in New Orleans, and they would do the exchange. We'd meet in Baton Rouge in the middle. And I remember all that. I remember my dad's apartment that he lived in. I remember the little house that we had in Lafayette. But I guess when you're that young, because I was, a baby when this happened. They were back together by the time I was 5 or 6, but they had gotten fully divorced, full papers, everything like that. You're that young, you don't make the connection that your parents are apart. And then they were back together, so I never had to really think about it until that time. And I think at 12, 13, I felt like betrayed at some point. Like, how did I not know? But then when I started to click things together, I realized, oh, this is a reflection of the two of them making a point of not bringing their relationship drama or whatever might have been happening into their parenting. And my dad, again, I really don't know what happened for them to get divorced, and it's not my business. It's not relevant to me. But what I can say for certain is I never, ever saw my dad raise his voice at my mom, call her out of her name. I never saw them fight. And my dad, in his entire life, even the craziness I did in high school and college, whatever, never once raised his voice at me. And so now I walk into relationships and I can tell a man, if my dad hasn't raised his voice at me in 31 years, there's no excuse for any man to be able to do that to me now. And my dad has always been very, he's a strong personality, but very, I would call him to some degree a feminist, right? Like he's always been very supportive of me doing my own thing and me pushing myself and having things for myself and knowing that in order to do that, I need a little bit of support, right? I need some advice along the way. And he's always been really great at that. But that is something that took time for me to appreciate, I guess. When I was younger, maybe the lectures was just like, okay, this is better than being grounded, right? And then I really started to listen. And I think, you become an adult, and especially this relationship between a father and a daughter, you start to recognize how much that gets reflected in your relationships with your partners. And so I was already appreciative of it, but it became even more important to me as I became an adult to maintain that relationship and kind of build on it, because I knew it was a reflection of how I would let men in my life treat me. And to those out there who don't have a close relationship with their father or have very good reasons not to, that same thing can be applied, right? If you have a father figure in your life who is detrimental to you, that you can't put on a pedestal, having boundaries with them is really important, in the same way that it would be important to have boundaries with a toxic male relationship in your life, right? So I think as we get older, and now we're all kind of therapized in some way, right? If you're not seeing a therapist, you're like following somebody on Instagram that's giving you therapy advice. And I think we all know how much parental relationships reflect into your personal life. But I think oftentimes we talk about it in terms of our childhood, but we can still change that in adulthood, right? I always had respect for my dad when I was growing up. We weren't as close as we are now. And that was an effort that I made, and both of us made to have. And yeah, I think just as a woman in general, it's important to take the time to recognize what that relationship between your father and you, or your father figure in you, is, how that's coming to play in your life today, right? And it takes effort. And also it means I try to go out of my way to tell my dad that I appreciate him. It also means when I need my dad, or I feel like he's not showing up for me in the way that I want him to. I mean, he's a very busy man, so I can't expect so much from him all the time, but I communicate that, and I communicate it in a way now that is more, how would I put it? I guess more adult. You know, when we become adults, right? There's certain things our parents can't save us from. We have to kind of transition that relationship. I'm not in a place where I'm asking my dad to do things for me, because I'm an adult. I should be doing them for myself, but it doesn't mean I'm entirely on my own. I can still ask for advice. I mean, when I started going through my divorce, we had this conversation because I was looking for divorce attorneys, right? And I'm going through this whole process, and I remember calling my dad, and I was kind of mad at him. And I was like, I know that, I've made this decision for myself, but I live in New York. My parents live in New Orleans. And I was like, I feel so alone. I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. And his reaction was just to be like, well, all you had to do was say that. And it kind of struck me because, when you're a child, you're so used to your parents just getting involved all the time, right? You get in a fight at school, or something happens at school, your teacher calls your parents, and then they're involved, right? As an adult, that doesn't happen. No one's checking in with them to tell them that something's going on in your life. Like, you have to ask for help, and you have to accept the fact that, like, one, they're not going to be able to give you the same kind of help at the same level of involvement as they did when you were a child. And then sometimes they're going to say no, right? But it's important to remember that dynamic still exists. You do have to ask, but for the most part, your parents they tend to want to help. And then also knowing that, like, sometimes you have to take your parents' advice with a grain of salt, because now you're both adults, right? You both have very different life decisions and life experiences, and you make decisions in different ways. And I think the biggest lesson I've kind of learned, particularly in my relationship with my dad, is because I tend to go to him for advice on how to solve a problem or how to do something, is that even if I'm going to him for advice, I don't have to do it exactly the way he's telling me, right? He still wants to give me I have autonomy. I can make certain decisions for myself, but he can be a place of like a safe space for me to work through something that I'm trying to solve, knowing that, one, he's had different life experience, but also because he knows me in a different way. And I think that's something important to talk about when we're kind of discussing parental relationships. I feel like my friends know me, my close friends know me really well, right? Because they see me every single day, and I'm giving them the nitty-gritty all the time. Your parents don't see that, right? So there is some sort of disconnect between how your parents view you and how you actually are. But your parents, for most people, right? Or actually, I don't know the statistics, but for a lot of people, your parents were around in your formative years. They do have a deep understanding of the core of who you are, even if they don't necessarily understand who you've become today, because they're a little further removed. But I do think it's important when making a decision. I like to have my parents' perspective alongside my friends' perspective, because they know me in a different way than my friends ever could, and vice versa, right? So yeah, when it comes to my dad, I think that my biggest, I guess, advice would be, particularly for my girls out there, is to not necessarily mend or prioritize a relationship with your father or father figure, whatever that may be, but at least take the time to understand it, because it does reflect so much in your romantic relationships. And I've seen a correlation between how strong the relationship is I have with my dad, between that and how I let men in my life treat me and the standards I hold for them. And then also when it comes to advice, I mean, through my most recent breakup, which was, as you guys know, because I've explained, was really hard on me. It was really nice to have my dad's opinion, because, if you're going through a breakup at 15, right? I wasn't going to my dad for anything, right? He's not giving me advice on a 15-year-old boy, whatever's going on. But now I'm an adult in an adult relationship. My dad actually has a really great perspective on how a 40-year-old man might be thinking about something. My dad's in his 60s. It's a lot easier for him to relate to a 40-year-old man and what he might be experiencing or thinking than it would be when I was, in high school and college. So I do think that's an important kind of relationship for me to have. And then when it gets to talking about mom, which I think is something that a lot of women, we all have some sort of complicated relationship with our moms. I think I joke with my friends all the time. Most of my girlfriends who have kids have boys, right? And I'm like, oh, they're going to love you forever. But my girlfriends, I'm like, they're going to hate you for like 5 to 10 years. That's just part of it. And I think that that relationship between a mother and daughter can be a bit difficult, right? Because I will say I'm not fully speaking on just specifically my relationship with my mom, because I'm kind of chiming in on dynamics that I've seen in friends and other relationships. But I think especially because of how different the world is that we live in, our generation, my generation, is today versus the generation our mothers grew up in is very different. And I've noticed that can be like a disconnect, right? So, for example, my mom has great friends now, but she grew up in an era where women had to be very competitive. She was coming up being a lawyer. There's only barely one spot for like one woman to become partner in a firm. Women are competing against each other, right? Versus now there's a lot more camaraderie amongst women. And I think for a while it was difficult for my mom to understand my female relationships with my other friends, because she didn't have a lot of relationships that were similar at that point. And then also, I can speak at least from between my mom and I, we grew up very differently. I definitely had a lot of trauma and things outside of family and whatnot and things that happened to me. But I also grew up in a very privileged, all things considered, a very privileged life, right? I'll repeat that. I grew up in a very privileged life compared to my mom. And, my parents are very well off now and very successful, and I'm so proud of them. For the most part, the peak of that happened after I moved out of the house, but we always had food on the table. Obviously, we always had a roof over our head. We always had clothes. We always, when my parents started making real money, we're going to private school, and that was always, education was always first and foremost in our family. But my mom grew up in rural Louisiana, very poor, and her success was her only way out, right? And when we compare lives, things are a lot easier for me. And I think there was probably a lot of difficulty for her if I was going to her for advice to relate. My problems growing up were, for the most part, very different from hers. I got bullied, right? I've talked about this, and which was very hard for me, but it was in a completely different way than my mom experienced things. So I always had a hard time when I was growing up in that house, kind of relating to her and vice versa. And we just clashed a lot. And I think especially at that time, it was easier for her to connect with my brother. Like I tell all my friends with boys, like your boy's going to love you forever. Right. And I always felt kind of like misunderstood by my mom. And it was a strained relationship. But things shifted when I don't want to say when I became an adult, but when I think she recognized me as an adult. And that I remember that happening around when I got married. And I think there was just this shift. And her and I have talked about this between when she was looking at me as her daughter who she needed to raise and give advice, and as almost like a friend or someone who like is fully developed and kind of I'm no longer a reflection of her in the same way that I used to be. And I think that kind of lifting that pressure made it easier for us to develop a different kind of relationship. And I remember specifically when I had my bridal shower, and I'll be honest, like I probably wasn't as nice to my mom as I should have been during that time. I was really stressed out about the wedding, and I was, as we know now, I got divorced and I was pretty unhappy at the time, so that probably colored a lot of that. But I remember she planned this big bridal shower, and she had connected with all my girlfriends, my bridesmaids and whatnot, and she found the one weekend they were all free. And I was so upset because I was like, oh, well, I wanted to do a big bachelorette party, and now you've taken the one weekend where all my friends are free. And I'll be honest, I was being a little selfish, and I wasn't considering that this was also like a really big moment for my mom. And she threw this amazingly beautiful party. She hosted all my friends from out of town, got them in a hotel. It was just the most amazing weekend. And one of the things I remember most about it was her pulling me aside and telling me how amazing she thought my friends were. And I realized that was the first time she was around all of my, a big group of my friends for an extended period of time. And I think what clicked for her was she stopped seeing me as the 15, 16-year-old that lived in her house forever, right? And started seeing me as the woman I am today as an adult woman. And then you see that the reflection of the women around me, how I have all of these like amazing, successful women around me, right? And it was like we simultaneously saw this shift in one another, and it really did change our relationship a lot. And I went from kind of, I think we've all been there, like your mom calls and you're kind of like dreading, like, oh, what is she gonna have to say? Or, I have to tell her a story, but I have to leave X, Y, and Z out, until I was like, oh, she sees me as a human being and as an adult human being. And there's not that my mom ever judged me per se, but I think there's an element of judgment, mother to daughter, because they're trying to teach you how to live life, right? So any action, anything you do, they're almost like analyzing it to say, this was great that you did, but like you probably should have done this, because they're trying to teach you, right? Versus when we had this shift, it was like, okay, she's an adult, she's going to do what she wants. I can comment on things, but it's not about me teaching her anymore. And that shift really changed our relationship. So now, I tell my mom everything. I'm trying to think of it. Maybe I don't go into like details about sex necessarily, but for the most part, I tell her everything. And I think that's a reflection of the work we've both put in. And, because I had a more complicated relationship with my mom growing up, I think it's important to talk about, because I said I have a lot of friends who will, and even people, sometimes I'll be in the Hamptons with my parents over the summer, and I'm doing like a Q&A, and my mom is there and we're drinking wine, and she jumps in and people will comment about how sweet they think our relationship is, and which I love. But it's important for me to note that like it took work to get there. And I'm really proud of the work that both of us have done to get there. And one of the more important elements of this, I think, is for both my parents, but especially my mom, is the shift on my end, which is, I think, hard for us as, I guess, kids in this situation, I think, because we put our parents up here, like they're adults, they've been on this earth longer than us, they should know better, right? But then when all of this is going down, I'm like, I'm about the same age as my mom was when she had me, and I don't have my shit together nearly as much as she did. And it just puts you in this position to look at your parents as human beings, right? Like I had this shift of going from seeing my mom as my mom and being like, well, I love that you did this, but I hated that you did this and you should have done this, whatever. And now I just see her as like, she is a human being who has always just been doing her best. Even if her best upset me at times or made me feel alienated or this or that, I'm like, she's human. I'm sure there's plenty of things that I did as a kid where she's just like, I'm trying to raise this kid and she's being such a fucking whatever, like we're all human. We all have human moments. And I'll admit, I still don't see my dad as fully human. He's like up on a pedestal for me. And I think it's important that I look at him that way. But I really do see my mom as human. And in doing that, it's been a lot easier for me to like let a lot of childhood trauma shit go. Right. And I say this knowing that there are so many people of you out there that don't need to, are perfectly, should be perfectly okay with not rebuilding a toxic relationship with someone, because it does take two people to make a relationship healthy. So I think anybody should be able to trust their own judgment about whether or not a relationship is worth working on. But I do have some friends where I look at, or, people have mentioned to me where I've looked at their relationship with their mom and there's maybe some trauma or drama or whatever it is, but it's not unrepairable. And I think it's important for all of us to look at our relationship with our parents and think, is this repairable? And do I want to repair it? Right. And then if you want to repair it, remembering that now we're adults, we have to be a part of that repair. And it's normal for parents to have boundaries. I have boundaries with my mom personally, but she also has boundaries with me, right? So, I have a brother, for this perfect example. I have a brother. We're very close in age. When we were kids, right, if my brother and I would get into a fight, my mom would be the mediator, right? Because we're children. As adults, she does not want to be a part of it, and I respect that. And I don't want her to be a part of it as well. But something like that, I look at that as something that is been part of what has shifted my relationship with her, because she's not involved in, in the nitty gritty between a relationship with me and my dad or a relationship with my brother or anything like that. She is just there to support me in that moment. And I think having healthy boundaries in that way has helped us a ton. And I would say, and it's not that I want credit for the work that I've put in, but I do think that in the grand scheme of me and my mom having a really healthy and strong relationship, it required more change on my end. And not change of me as a person, but change in my perspective, right? My mom decided, she got to a point where she saw me as an adult, but I think the key element is that I started to see her as a human, as just a person trying to get through life rather than just being my mom. And I realized there's a shift of like, there was a point where I was very selfish in my relationship with her, and that every time I called her, I was talking about myself. That's what we do with our parents. It's like, I need help. This is what's going on, whatever. But then I had to make a shift of like, my mom has her own life, right? If I'm going to build this relationship with her, what's going on with her friends? Is she stressed at work? Like, oh, let her tell me some gossip about what's going on, even if I don't know the people, right? Like a relationship with, and it's just like a relationship with a friend. It goes both ways. You have to meet in the middle. And when I look at, my relationship with my mom now, I really do see it as more of a friendship than a mother-daughter relationship. There's still, of course, a level of respect there because she's my mom, but we handle our relationship more like we're adult friends, and her expectations of me are that I act like an adult and I not revert back to childhood behaviors. And my expectation of her is that she sees me as the adult that I am today and not the kid I was in her house for 18 years. And that's not something that happens overnight. And it also requires sometimes turning a blind eye, or, if my mom makes a comment that hurts my feelings, sometimes I need to tell her, and sometimes I have to let it roll off, right? Like we don't have to, we pick our battles, right? And I think with me, there's things that I tell her where she feels like, okay, it's time to interject. I got to give advice on this. And I need to tell her my opinion. And there's times where has to say, she's an adult. She might have to just learn this lesson on her own. And I guess like the moral of this, if I'm going to like tie a pretty bow on it, is that in general, relationships take work and take effort from both parties. And I think the parent-child relationship as we're growing up is lopsided. It is more of the parent putting in the work. But if you want to maintain a relationship or fix a relationship with your parents as an adult, it requires you to treat them more like you're on the same level. And of course, again, there's respect and whatnot there, but it's important to see them as humans. And I think, and I've talked about this with my therapist a bunch, I think a huge part of how I'm able to look at my childhood trauma or like things that happened to me or even fights I had with my parents in the past, right? I'm able to look at it so much differently now because I don't, even if at the time I saw it as, oh, my mom is yelling at me or she's not understanding me or whatever it is, I can at least look back on it and say, she really was doing the best that she could do. My dad really was doing the best that he could do with the resources that he had, with the time that he had. And when you're a child, you don't have the perspective or, the wherewithal to understand what an adult might be juggling outside of what's happening in your own life. Children are inherently selfish, right? But as an adult, we can change our perspective and we can use that change in perspective to change the relationship that we have with the people in our life, and namely our parental figures. And yeah, I don't want this episode to come off preachy by any means, because I am very proud of my relationship that I have with my parents. But I really I want to come across from this is that it really took a lot of work, and it still continues to take work. And I look back and college and my early days in New York, my mother and I had a very strained relationship that was like very up and down. And I've always looked up to my dad, but we weren't always as close at times where I felt like if I was having a bad day, I could just call him. But it took a lot of effort on my end and then them meeting me halfway to get there. And I think I look at that as like the last 10 years. And really between my mom and I'd say the last 4 years, the both of us have put in a lot of work to get to where we are. And I think it just requires giving a lot of grace, right, to our parents. And again, I want to reiterate that not every familial relationship needs to be resurrected or we can have boundaries, right? But for those of you who may have been in a similar situation with me where they want to be closer with their parents or had some trauma or whatever, for whatever reason is your own, if you want to strengthen your relationship with your parents or get closer to them and whatnot, because it's very easy at this stage in our life, you're 30 plus, you have your own life going around and we don't live in the same neighborhoods and even the same city or state as our parents do now. It takes more effort. But if you're someone who's interested in building that relationship, I live thousands of miles away from my parents. I did convince them to buy a vacation house near me selfishly because I wanted to spend more time with them. But if you asked me, if you asked me 6-8 years ago if I wanted my parents to get a vacation house somewhere near me, I would have been like, absolutely not. Like, I need to keep them away. I want to have my own life. And now it's entirely different. And I don't think I'd be the person I am today, obviously without them raising me, but I wouldn't be the person I am today if I didn't have the adult relationship with my parents that I have now. And that might not sound cool or fun or cute, but it takes effort. It takes investing. I do have to go out of my way to spend real time with my parents. And there was probably a time where that felt lame, but now I love going out to dinner with my parents. I love staying at home and watching a movie with my mom. I think I think about looking back over the summer, and there was this one moment that really made me appreciate, and I'll end with this. There was one moment that really made me appreciate my relationship with my mom and how far we've come. So over the summer, we were out at my parents' home in the Hamptons, and it was, I think, just like a weekday. I was working in a different room. My mom texted me saying, like, do you want to watch a movie? And we have this little like movie theater. I thought she was going to meet down there, and she said, come to my room. And I sat in my mom's bed with her, and I don't even remember what we watched. I think we watched The Holiday. There was this moment where I look over at my mom, and I'm cozied up in pajamas in bed with my mom, eating snacks in the bed, and we're watching this movie. And I looked at her, I was like, I don't think we've done this since I was maybe like 12 years old. Because there became a point where it became uncool, I guess, for me to be like hanging out with my mom like that. You're like, oh, I'm a teenager. I'm not sitting in bed with my mom and watching a movie. And then you move out of the house, you become an adult, and those opportunities just aren't there anymore. And then you have your own family and have your own kids that you're sitting in the bed watching a movie with. And it was like this moment of me being like, I'm 31 years old, sitting in bed with my mom, watching a movie, and we're like giggling and eating snacks. And it just really made me appreciate all the work that I've put in to have that kind of relationship with my mom. Yeah, I think so. I'd like to, oh, Puck, do you have something to say? Well, you don't know your mom because I took you away from her when you were very small, but I'm your mom now, and I love you, and you're my best friend. I'll end with this. With whatever the status of your relationship is with your parents, it's important to at least mend it, but if you can't mend it, at least understand it, because it's going to affect you in so many different ways. And also know that if you can't have a relationship with your family like that, there's this thing called chosen family. And you can also have both. I have my actual family who I love and have worked on my relationship with them, but I also have my chosen family that are almost as important, and in some cases just as important to me as my blood family. And it's mending those relationships or changing those relationships or setting boundaries in those relationships is harder than you think. But Puck is in the screen. Right, he has something to say. We'll keep going. Either whatever you're going to do in those relationships, it's going to be easier than you think in a lot of ways, harder than you think in a lot of ways. It's going to take more time, but it's also going to happen quicker than you think, which sounds crazy. All of that is true at once. And I am a walking example of that. And I think with everything that I've been through in my life and what my parents have been through in their lives and their relationships with their family and whatnot, if we can all get to this place, so can you. And that's if it's becoming best friends with your family, if it's just becoming closer with them, or like I said, if it's creating certain boundaries with them. I think it's important that we all kind of take a beat to reflect on that. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. And I hope sharing my experience helps you a little bit, or gives some perspective, or I don't know, tells you what not to do if that's what you feel like. Do whatever it is that you want, I guess. But this is the It Girls Guide, so I'm trying to give you some sort of guidance, and it worked for me, so maybe it'll work for you.